They didn't tell me they were putting me after Mary Rowe. So my apologies. Also, I am not a dental hygienist. Let's just be clear about that. And they asked me to come talk about transportation, and I geek out about transportation. So these will be geekier issues than you may be used to. I'm not going to talk about buses, but happy to talk about that offline or after in questions. Okay, so doesn't he? Oh, it's the green one. Okay, how do I back up? I geek out, but I can't control PowerPoint. How do I back up? Is it the? There you go. A system built this, not one designer. And a system continues to build these things, which is why it's very difficult to resist them. There's a logic to these systems. It's deep into structures. And if we want to make change, we have to change systems. Right? So I'm going to make it easy for you. Here are the takeaways. I'm going to repeat them later. But if you take a picture of this now, you're done. You can leave, and you can come back after about 16 minutes. And then you would have enjoyed Mary Rowe and then just one slide from me. But here it is. If you want to change things, you have to change the system. Information itself is getting built out as an infrastructure. This is hidden from us, but we experience it every day. Tech innovation also requires institutional innovation. That's what we always forget. And then if we want transportation to work and transportation information to work, you have to do two things. And this echoes what Mary was talking about. You have to focus on the users and their needs, and you have to build on values that we share. Either, if an imbalance of those will either be too top-down or too bottom-up and lacking direction that works for the public good. Also, I'm going to tell you people you should read from the canon of, outside the canon of urbanists. Again, you can take a picture of this and you're done, and you can then not listen to the rest of it. 4 people, Donella Meadows, wrote a monograph that's still available online, Places to Intervene in a System. Stuart Brand has written many books, but he's famous for the first one to ever ask for, why don't we have a picture of the whole Earth? This was in the 60s after the satellites went up. He's got 2 books. He got many books, but 2 that I would recommend. How Buildings Learn, Clock of the Long Now, which is long-term thinking. James Gleick is what they call an idea biographer. And one of his recent books was more than a decade now, so I don't know if it's recent. The Information, a History, a Theory, and a Flood, and it's how information has shaped our society. And he explains how speaking drums and the science of information are all related. Right? Douglas Allen, Institutional Revolution, and this is the themes that I'm going to be talking about, that as technology changes, institutions have to shift, and that's where the power is. I'm not related to any of them. I do not earn anything from recommending their books, but please do read them. So let's start with Donella Meadows. She listed down 12 places to intervene in the system. She listed them counting down from the ones with the least power to the most power. And the first one is you change the system by changing what you measure. Right? And I will guarantee to you that in any city, and particularly in Halifax, the most measured thing you will have in all of the databases of the city will be how vehicles move. Right? It's vehicle counts daily, hourly, and everything else. So we need to start changing what we measure, as that old management adage goes, what gets measured matters and what gets measured changes. So I'm going to be talking about the power of information to shape systems and perpetuate injustice. So you might think of information that's just Excel on your spreadsheet or something that runs something else, but they can bury and shape injustice, right? They can shape a system and bury injustice. 2 examples, redlining, right, which I know happened also in Canada. Redlining, of course, was shaped by bigoted, racist, cultural, and sociological forces. But it was expressed informationally. It was simply this conclusion without any research that households of color, people of color, were a greater credit risk. Right? So, therefore, don't give them loans. And so, therefore, the agency, the Home Ownership Lending Corporation in the US created the redlining maps that said, here are the communities where there are households of color. There are risky communities or risky neighborhoods. Don't lend to them. And that shaped not just the way we do zip codes, but the way we provided private credit and the way we provided public amenities, and these communities got left behind, right? Because we just said informationally, they're not worth the credit, so therefore banks are not going to give and governments are not going to provide resources. And that has shaped US cities, and I bet it has also shaped Canadian cities. Interestingly enough, when we came around with urban renewal and running highways through cities to tear down communities, which parts did we tear down? These areas that had no investments in them, no private or public investments. Because informationally we said, this is what drives it. We think they are a risk, even if there was no evidence behind it, but it was so buried down. In fact, in the US, your zip code defines your outcomes in life and your outlook in life, both your life expectancy, and you can have as big a gap as 3 years between one zip code to another zip code in the same city, and the zip code is built on redlining. The other one is level of service, which is much more of transportation. And level of service is a simple measure. How many vehicles pass through a segment of street within a given time frame? The assumption behind it is the more vehicles pass through, the better it is for the system, right? So the assumption is where efficiency is more movement. And so you get interchanges because intersections take time, you get wider roads, you get less sidewalks, you get unhealthy cities. Because we said that the measure at the base of it is level of service. So information shapes the system and very often perpetuates injustice. So we have to be very conscious about how information systems are getting built and what they're deciding. So in 2018, we did the first time ever, a Department of Transportation, at least as far as I know, so if someone wants to correct me, in the US did a first time ever citywide public survey, or public life survey, which is we go out and study what exactly are people doing on the street. Are they social? Are they walking alone? Have they gone shopping? We say citywide because we only did 108 blocks of 3,000 or so blocks within the city, but it was the first time ever. And the reason we did that, apart from understanding what people are doing, is these are all the sensors we use in the city of Seattle. And that little number on the middle lower portion of bottom half of the slide is we have 12 sensors for bike and pedestrian counts. The only way we count people is, are they crossing a particular intersection, or how many bikes are passing. Compare that to the 3,000 parking pay meters we have, the 241 cameras, all of the sensors we have to tell us how our vehicles moving. So we need to shift that, and so every time we make decisions, then it is driven by the evidence that is a biased evidence because it's gathering only what 2-ton vehicles are doing. Right? So we need to get the squishy parts into the mixture. And so the other thing that we need to be conscious about too is how information moves and what we react to. This is a slide, a graph I stole from Stuart Brand. He worked with Patrick Duffy, and it's called shearing layers. And the idea is that in any system, there are things that change very rapidly, like fashion in society changes very rapidly. It is weaker and has less power, but it's very evident. And there are things that change very, very slowly, and they're more powerful and they're less visible. So emergencies and incidents, that kind of information changes your travel for a day. It's not going to be permanent, but when you talk about road geometries and regulations, that's very, very powerful. And sometimes it takes forever to decide to spend, the 300 million or the 3 million it might take to take off an intersection so buses can turn, and you spend years on it because it's shaped that already. And deeper down are the system values and goals, governance, basically who's at the table and who gets to decide what's important. So as we think about information and transportation, we have to think about these layers of information and how powerful they are. The further down you go to change things, the more power you can change the system. So might be news to you, someone already mentioned it, that transportation is getting disrupted. Urban transportation is getting disrupted. First it was all this talk about autonomous vehicles, right? Maybe it'll come in 5 years, maybe it'll come in 80 years. And then you've got shared bikes that came. First it was the dock shared bikes about a decade ago, then the dockless shared bikes, and then the electric bikes. Now you've got electric scooters, and then there'll be drones. They're calling them personal delivery devices. I don't know what's personal about them, but they're going to be coming on city streets. So it's changing. And my particular interest is cities are departments of transportation are interested in changes in technology of transportation, the vehicle and the mode. And rightly so, because that's how people move. But that's all driven by changes in how people receive information. The most disruptive thing in transportation is in your pocket and your ability to see a map and to figure out where you're going and to get a ride. Right? So what are we doing in terms of that? And that's all built on this information stack that is in your phone that allows you to see where you are and maybe get on a bus or get on a ride share and whatever else. And that's being built largely by private sector with a lot of information from government, but without a lot of interaction apart from that use, right? So let's go back to Donella Meadows. Places to intervene in a system. 6 is the structure of information flows. Who gets information and what can they use it for? 2 is the goals of the system. 3 is the mindset or paradigm of what is important. And then the power to transcend paradigms. And so what we did was, we're drafting the Transportation Information Infrastructure Plan. Because at the base of all the transportation changes that are happening is this information infrastructure. And we as a Department of Transportation are good with, pardon the pun, concrete. What is concrete? With paint, with signals. We're not yet good in handling information. And that's what we need to plan for. So there's a hidden transportation ecosystem that's emerging. And our question is, what's our role in that? How do we make sure it works for the public good, which is our remit, right? And we start with, basically, we start with saying that information is as important as all the other modes. It's as important as a mode. That's why we need to have a plan for it. And creating this plan creates 2 things. There's an informational challenge. Why? This is 2 more concepts to throw at you, bound and unbound communication. The thing on the left is a blanket from the Lakota, and it's the tale of 2 summers over a year. It's gorgeous, a gorgeous blanket. It's information rich, but you have to have experienced that to understand what it's saying. The thing on the right is a cuneiform script from the Fertile Crescent, and what it is the beginnings of letters and numbers and language that is then transferable. So the one on the right is unbound because I can reinterpret that and use the same signs. The one on the left is bound. It's very, very rich, but you need to know the experience of it. And pretty much government information is like that. It's bound in databases, in spreadsheets and whatever else, and it's not very easy to transmit them. The institutional challenge is we need to change from just simply gathering information. The reason governments are called bureaucracies is literally they have bureaus where the rules were put and the records were put. And we're good at collecting information. We're not good in broadcasting information, which is what you need to do to interact with the information system. Another point then that this is a challenge, right? That tech innovation requires institutional innovation because we do not have those capacities, right? We know, again, concrete stuff. So the question is, how do we do this apart from having a plan? The first thing is what we need to do is to focus on the users and to say what information needs do people have so that they can get around the city, including what kind of protections do they need, right? That they may say, my privacy is an issue. And so we looked and thought about and worked with our community to say, what is the information you actually need to be able to use this emerging transportation system, right? In whatever capacity and abilities you may have. And that's so important that we focus on the user because we tend to focus on vehicles rather than the user experience. Right? And that answers all of the things that, what if I don't have a credit card, right? What if I don't have the same abilities as you? And including the cultural issues that underlie all of these things. The other thing that we need to do is we need to build on values. So focusing on users helps us to focus on the people who actually use it. But as you know, on the internet, there's another book that I didn't list. I will recommend. Gia Tolentino wrote a book called Trick Mirror, Adventures in Self-Delusion. Her first essay in that book is The I in Internet. And what she basically says is, and you feel it, right? The business of the internet has been built on focusing on the self. There was a term they used to use about a decade ago when open data was going around, and they said, it's the information exhaust. That's what's important. Or they used to say, and they still do, information is the new oil, which is very apt because information has created existential threats to our society. By knowing what exactly you are doing and where you go and what you're interested in, I can target you and polarize you. Right? And then I can also sell that without you knowing it. So we need to do both. Focus on a user and make sure the public it is protected by focusing on values. Seattle Department of Transportation has 6 values, right? We say equity because we know the transportation system has, and the investments in it has been instrumental in so much injustice in our cities, right? And so we need to put that first and make sure we form the Transportation Equity Advisory Council. We're creating transportation equity goals to make sure that whatever we do, we are not just mitigating, but we are trying to correct past injustice. Safety, of course. Far too many people are getting killed on our roads, and that should not be the case. We have to stop calling them accidents. They are collisions, and we need to stop being obsessed with 2-ton vehicles as they are the drivers, forgive the pun, of our transportation networks. Mobility, so that you have more transportation options, and we know that has so much to do with the opportunities that you can get to and how goods move in our cities. We value sustainability, and this is me talking and not the agency. Whenever someone brings up why we should have protected bike lanes, I have to ask them whether they believe in the climate crisis or not. If you believe in the climate crisis, you need protected bike lanes, right? Because that's the most sustainable way. Cars, individual, privately owned cars, are just not sustainable. It's just not sustainable for households. It costs, in our city, it's about $12,500 a year per household to own one car. It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for the city. All of that money goes out to entities that are not part of the local economy. And it's not sustainable for the planet. Livability, because the right-of-way is not just for vehicles. It's the fabric of our cities. And lastly, for our own agency, excellence. Right? We have to do things, and we are proud of the work we do, and we must celebrate it, and we have to push ourselves to do better, even better. I lead the transformation work in our agency, and we're trying to build a culture of innovation by building a culture of asking, can we do this better? There are 4 other information imperatives that we come up with because nothing in the game currently answers these. One is transportation information should help us as a city and you as an individual contribute to accelerating decarbonization. Right? It should advance equity, mitigate and correct injustice. It should protect privacy because our travels through the city are so unique that I could sell you a cup of coffee because I know you're in that spot of town at that particular time every day. And then I can sell it to somebody else. And so we have to protect privacy. And lastly, we have to level the playing field because these big private providers are trying to span the whole value chain and monopolize it. And that's great if it's better service. It's terrible if the next day they lose $5 billion and they go out of business, right? And then we're left holding the bag. And so those are let me go back to my takeaways. If you want wholesale, wide-scale change, you have to change systems. Think about information, how it flows, and what's getting built on it. Most of that is hidden. Tech innovation requires institutional innovation, which means how are your institutions changing to adapt to that? And then focus on the users and build on values. And maybe the next set of transportation information, the infrastructure we're building, will work more for all of us and work for our cities. Thank you.